Welcome to Lunch with Legacy Leaders, a weekly talk show with local and national thought leaders on issues impacting the Black community. Now introducing our host, Miss Ann Marie Sorrell.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Lunch with Legacy Leaders. I am your host, Ann Marie Sorrell, President and CEO of the Mosaic Group. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are excited about our guests today, but first I want to thank our sponsors, Florida Power and Light and the Florida Lottery, for partnering with Lunch with Legacy Leaders. So we're going to get right to it because, as you guys know, we're a short talk show that wants to get you the information you need right away. So we're going to bring on our special guest today, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Tony.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have so much going on right now in the community, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I just want to read your bio real quick so that our audience can get to know you better for those who may not be familiar with you and your background. So Sheriff Gregory Tony brings a wealth of experience, expertise, and knowledge to the Broward Sheriff's Office, cultivated from his long career serving in a variety of law enforcement and public safety capacities. Throughout his career, he has led by example and worked tirelessly to fulfill his promise to keep our community safer. The Philadelphia native moved to the Sunshine State to play college football at Florida State University, go Noles, under the leadership of legendary coach Bobby Bowden. Everybody loved Bobby Bowden. I was in Tallahassee at that time. FAMU, of course. Exactly, go Rattlers. He graduated from FSU in 2002 with an undergraduate degree in criminology. He also holds a master's degree in criminal justice from Nova Southeastern University, go Sharks, and has worked as an adjunct professor for 8 years. Man, we have a lot in common here. Sheriff Tony began his law enforcement career in 2005 with the Coral Springs Police Department, where he served on the SWAT team for 5 years and rose to the rank of sergeant. He also worked in narcotics investigation, burglary apprehension, street intelligence, and field force. With a passion for saving lives and all too aware of the numerous active shooter and mass bombing tragedies occurring throughout the country and around the world, Sheriff Tony left the Coral Springs Police Department in 2016 to focus on running Blue Spear Solutions. The security firm specializes in providing both public and private sector with active shooter and mass casualty training, and provide schools and businesses with threat assessments. The training platform is being used by thousands of people across the globe. As sheriff, he pledges to educate all Broward schools as quickly as possible with his life-saving training. Sheriff Tony was sworn in on January 11, 2019 to lead the Broward Sheriff's Office. He promises to bring the same work ethic, and leadership quality he's displayed throughout his career to BSO, ensuring it remains the finest public safety agency in South Florida. Wow, what a resume.
Sounds good when you're reading it.
It is good. It's all good. So congratulations on all your accolades and achievements. So let's get right to it, because I think your bio really explains, why you're in the position you're in, and seems that you've been prepared for some of the things that you're facing right now. So the relationship with law enforcement in the Black community in America has had its challenges dating back decades, and therefore there's a lack of trust in our community as a result. This fact, coupled with your appointment by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, how have you been able to earn the trust of the Black community in Broward County? And what methods have you taken to do so?
Sure. I think the comment on the question is a little misplaced. Law enforcement mistrust in the Black community, our community, doesn't go back and span just a decade. We're talking about hundreds of years. And much of that is because this very uniform, in which I'm honored to wear, was used to suppress us from the ability to write, to live in a fair manner in this country, whether it be from slavery to segregation to Jim Crow, so on and so forth. And so I've always tried to relate back to the community. One, I understand because I live it. I'm the first African-American sheriff in this agency's history of 105 years.
Wow.
And you kind of highlighted on some of the things that I've been where I've come from in terms of background. But long before, I was a law enforcement officer, I was that young kid with the knee on his neck. We're talking about George Floyd's murder. And so before this would transpire and occur in Broward County, one of the key things I wanted to do was bring forth real accountability and transparency in terms of how we deal with our law enforcement officers when they step outside the lines of the law, when they misuse their powers and abuse people. And we put a multitude of checks and things in balance in place. And we'll talk a little bit more about them as we go on. But we also had to be an organization that was really involved in community engagement. This agency has roughly $1 billion operating budget and affords a great deal of latitude to use those funds in a manner that's not just going out and arresting everyone and putting handcuffs and doing the, protect and serve model of law and order. We do much more than that. So I reallocated funds to make sure we would be much more inclusive with our neighborhood support teams, getting our deputies out of the vehicles, starting to build more community partnerships across all spectrums, from the LGBTQ community to the Black community, Hispanic community. So people actually have a voice in this agency, and that we have an understanding about what the real concerns are on the street level, and not just, look at things from an administrative standpoint and discount the realities that racism still exists. It certainly is part of the criminal justice system. I've had to weed out elements even here within BSO, bringing more balance in terms of diversifying this agency, which is key for us to trust in terms of the Black community, to trust the people that are in here. We need to look like the community. And I put forth the most diverse command staff in 105 years. My undersheriff is the first African-American female to hold that post. And so we started there, but we also knew to gain public trust, I would listen to my community stakeholders, my mayors, my city commissioners. And Ann Marie, they would say, we don't have enough Black deputies on the road. So I had to really look at the numbers. And I think when I first came in, out of our sworn law enforcement personnel, roughly 1,500 deputies, only 200 of them, give or take a little bit more, a little over 200, were African American.
Wow.
And so that's automatically kind of a red flag for me to see that as diverse as Broward County is, that we didn't have enough law enforcement officers in those roles. And so we built out recruiting. I know that's a little long-winded on the first question, but I can go all day. We've been really busy here.
No, that's really good. And I think that's so important, because if we're talking about really affecting change, the recruitment piece and getting more Black men, Black women into law enforcement is going to be critical, and not just in law enforcement, but into those decision-making and leadership positions as well. So kudos to you for launching that recruitment effort. And I do want to just add on to that, because one of the things I did observe way back, and you can maybe help us out on where BSO is in this effort. I know a while back from a business standpoint that there was an effort for BSO to do more work with Black-owned businesses and minority businesses in the community. How is that effort going under your leadership? Has there been more enhancements, more changes? Are you buying more with Black businesses and minority businesses?
No, that was a crucial area as well. When I started to examine our vendor contracts and who we were doing business with, you could clearly see that we had a disproportionate number of vendors who were not part of the minority community, whether it be Black, female-owned businesses, things of that nature. And what I committed to is making sure that we would start putting forth, a balanced approach in how many vendors are giving opportunities, whether it be our cleaning services that we use to help out our facilities, whether it be food services and things of that nature that we are bringing in to again, bring more balance out to where are these funds going? Because if our small Black businesses in the county are not given the same type of opportunities for revenue streams, then they fail, then they don't survive. And when we lose our mom and pop stores, when we lose those small law firms that are Black-owned businesses, it impacts our ability to have a much more progressive and balanced out economy and fair opportunities for employment. So prime example, one of the key things that we have going right now, we broke ground on a $30 million training center that we're going to build out. And I committed to make sure that we stay within the CBE codes at 30% of that will go back to minority-owned businesses. That's $10 million. That's not a small chunk of change, but it does impact how our local businesses that are owned by Blacks and minorities get a fair stake at this thing. And I'll add another item here. You talked about implementation of building trust. One of the core things that we have not had in this agency's history is a committal to racial equity and implicit bias training, so that our deputies understand the cultural differences, the real cultural differences, not things that are mythical or made up, but the realities of what it is to be a Black person in this country, not just in this county, but in this country. And the county launched this program several years ago. Our predecessors opted out of it; they didn't participate in it. And I committed $500,000 up front to train every single one of my deputies. But after looking at what happened to Mr. Floyd and his murder up in Minneapolis, I said, I got to do more. And so I committed $1 million so that we make sure not only BSO is trained, but we can do this training for Fort Lauderdale, Miramar, Coconut Creek, those cities that have municipals that don't fall under our jurisdiction. But we're all connected. And something bad happen in Coconut Creek, BSO will respond. And so I figured if we're going to be proactive about these things, let's do it on a larger scale, not just for the agency.
Absolutely. Well, that is wonderful to hear, and definitely want to see more of that, that in action, and definitely want to see more of the procurement opportunities, because I think a lot of times too, Black businesses are not thinking, oh, I can do business with the sheriff office. But you guys buy, just like every other government agency, you buy a lot of things. You buy a lot of products, a lot of services. So kudos, definitely want to see more of that outreach into the community as well. So you touched a little bit on the tragic death of George Floyd, which has sparked global protests against police brutality. Right. Broward County has certainly had its share of cases. What have you done during your time as sheriff specifically to address police brutality and use of excessive force? And are there any new initiatives or policy changes that your agency will be implementing to address these issues and continue to strengthen your relationship with the Black community?
Well, I tell you, I'm way ahead of the curve when it comes to making sure we were doing things in a proactive step and not being reactive. One of the things that I noticed early on, probably within February of last year, so all of maybe 30 days in the agency, was that we didn't have a truly active account for deputies who would step out of line, an early warning system. There was one that was put in place years ago, and it was allowed to lax and was not tracking any type of patterns of anyone who would, produce type of violence or excessive force. That's a huge issue because we see it time and time again. Even in Mr. Floyd's case, the officer had 16, 17 different encounters of excessive force or some type of pattern that exhibit. Maybe we need to pull this guy off the road. Maybe he needs to be fired. Maybe he needs to be reassigned. Maybe he needs some type of remedial training. We can't afford to miss those things. So we launched that. We also introduced something called Blue Team Tracker. For all of my districts, we account for every single use of force that occurs in those districts. And then it's streamlined up to our administrative process here in the public safety headquarters. But I also added something that was unique because I didn't like how we were analyzing, looking under past practices, use of force cases. We would have one defensive tactics instructor who was responsible for training all the deputies, but he was also part of the decisionary process as to whether or not they were compliant. I thought that was an enormous conflict of interest in that it wasn't consistent with what agencies do to this scale. So I built out for the first time our use of force review board, which is comprised of roughly a half a dozen subject matter experts within the agency. And now we analyze every single use of force just to get a second set of eyes on it from that panel, from that board, to make sure people are in compliance, because we didn't want to afford a captain or a lieutenant in another district to have the autonomy to just check off and say things are in compliance, but it's not consistent with the agency is doing. That was another key thing. And then last year, Ann Marie, I'm sure you can recall, we had several different high priority excessive forces cases occur here in Broward County, and they went national. And what we had in place, it's been in place for about 30 years now, is something called the Professional Standards Committee. The Professional Standards Committee was designed to bring both law enforcement administrators and civilians together to sit on this committee and review all of our internal affairs investigation cases, and then provide a recommendation for what they think would be an appropriate discipline level. Now, with that, every administration sets their own culture, sets their own standard. And so when I came into the office, I had to assess it first. Is this going to be a culture that I concur with? Is this going to be a model that I agree with? And we started having cases take place. One, of course, the most horrific school shooting incident in American history over at Stoneman Douglas. The committee recommended suspensions for some of these people. So that doesn't make sense. 17 people died. And so I had to terminate. I went against the Professional Standards Committee. Not popular, but I had to do it. Then I also had a case where a deputy was captured on his own body-worn camera beating an individual in a hospital who's handcuffed to a bed. That same Professional Standards Committee had recommended just suspension. So I'm starting to see a pattern here. Had another case come up where a deputy was involved with, taking a young man in Tamarack, the DeLuca Roll case. Everyone knows about that name. They heard the case. Slammed his head down for basically a disorderly conduct type of case. And they recommended to exonerate him, meaning no discipline action, no accountability. He's totally justified. That was it. At that point, I decided I was going to reset the Professional Standards Committee, vacate all 11 posts, and I brought in a more balanced group of individuals from the administration. I interviewed every single one of them, let them know what my expectations were. But then I wanted to bring in civilians who can make good arguments in these rooms. So I hired attorneys. I brought attorneys on. I brought in a former U.S. attorney prosecutor who's outstanding. And I said, what else can we do to bring balance? Because for so often, and you probably heard about this in the news, the union representation in these rooms take on a very aggressive bullying effect. And civilians had a hard time with that. So I hired a judge to be the chairman. We've never had a judge chair the Professional Standards Committee in the history of this agency. Julio Gonzalez, Dominican brother, who is doing a great job in there. So we put these things in place, and now I'm being able to get recommendations that make sense. But at the end of the day, this comes down to simple leadership. If the men and women are not in compliance and the recommendations are not suitable, the community needs to know that I have the strength and fortitude to go against the grain when it means doing the right thing for this community and not just this agency.
Well, and I love that, because it's so important as leaders that when we're in positions of leadership that we do what's right and not what's popular. And a lot of times leaders fall into doing what's popular, especially, for yourself. You have to be reelected. You have to be elected to your position. Yes, you were appointed initially, but for future, you have to be elected. So you have to really, have that decision of, okay, am I going to do what's right for the people at the end of the day, because that's what I've been sworn to do? Or am I going to do what's popular and what's going to, get me votes or you get me political clout or whatever that may be? So I definitely applaud you for taking the steps to do what's right and not necessarily what's popular.
The interesting thing, I appreciate that. The interesting thing about that, Ann Marie, is when I had to make those decisions months ago, it was controversial. It was, he's really breaking customs and traditions, and he's going against his Professional Standards Committee. But now we fast forward, 10, 12 months into where we are now, and everyone's saying it was the right thing to do. We can't afford for a Minneapolis to happen here in Broward County. We can't afford to have someone brutally murdered at the hands of law enforcement officers and then response, because it's retroactive. I mean, the harm's already done. Someone's already dead and they're not coming back. And so I was proud to see my command staff, which, by the way, is all veteran BSO employees, sit here and agree that, Sheriff, this is the right path to take, and we're behind you.
Absolutely. That is amazing. So as a top law enforcement officer, you currently face several challenges, including keeping residents safe during a global pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that has continued to have a set of challenges. Protests, your ongoing daily responsibilities, and an upcoming election. How are you handling all of these matters? And do you feel your experience has prepared you for a time like this?
Gosh, let me start with how are we handling these things. So, of course, the COVID-19 crisis was a very huge and frightening time, unprecedented time for us as an organization, for us as a county. And we had to really pivot and work with county officials when executive orders will come up or administrative orders will come up, which restricted a lot of our freedoms that we're accustomed to having. But fortunately here, with the size and scale of our agency and the budget that we have, One of the key things was, are we going to have enough equipment? Can we do these things? And it was easy for me to reallocate. I think we spent roughly $4 million on the COVID-19 crisis in terms of personal protection equipment to make sure our people were safe. We did all the same things in terms of checks and balances to keep us healthy, because if we're not healthy, we can't provide our services, which can be life-threatening levels of care that we need to put forth in the community. But then we were challenged. We took on some challenges. There was a time with the ports being shut down, and there was a lot of scare across the country where ships, cruise ships, were not allowed to dock for sake of the spread of the virus. The president didn't want to do it. The governor didn't want to do it. And it was just like a lot of things going on that consciously I just could not accept. And we put forth rescue operations. I think we got off roughly 4,000 people off the boats, got them to definitive care safely, and didn't spread the virus. So a huge challenge, but successful. Then we start looking at what can we do to help the community. I got a lot of phone calls early on, Ann Marie, about, hey, listen, what are you going to be making arrests? We don't want to, put more people in jail. And so I called all the chiefs of police and I said, listen, if we have an outbreak in this jail right now, one, I'm responsible for the care, custody, and control of every single inmate in there. We can't afford to have that population contract a large volume of virus where it impacts us having to take people out of the jail and put them in a medical healthcare system, which burdens one system after the other. And so I put out an order and said, hey, we can't start making these miscellaneous arrests. And we had something happen that hasn't happened here in a long time. Our inmate population had started out probably about 80, 78%, had dropped down to about 63% at its lowest time because we stopped making miscellaneous arrests. The trespass, the disorderly conduct, it just wasn't worth the risk of, one, my law enforcement personnel capturing and acquiring the virus from someone they're in contact with, contaminating the jail, so on and so forth. But it was a trigger point for me. If we were able to do that within 60 days and drop the inmate population down to 64, 63%, why aren't we doing that more frequently? Because 4,276 beds are available at that jail. And we dropped down to about 2,000, couple hundred. We didn't have any major issues. We didn't influx this already disproportionately criminal justice system and corrections, where I think last year, before I came in, roughly 7,000 arrests occurred, misdemeanor arrests, and 70% of those arrests were Black people, Black and brown people. 4,900 people of color in this jail. And so new practice, we are pushing civil citation like no other. We're pushing adult citation programs and juvenile to help mitigate this influx of people going into our jails. If you're not familiar with this, Ann Marie, the operating costs for the jail is roughly $278 million every year.
Wow.
And my thought process is, wait a minute, okay, if we can cut the population down by increasing arrests, and that means I have more latitude to take some of that money, some of that $278 million, and put it into programs that keep people actually out of jail and help uplift them out of the poverty and things that so often impact criminality.
Wow. That is literally music to my ears. So
that's the COVID-19 crisis. But now we're back. Now we got to talk about where we are with, the more serious aspect about how do we change the police reform aspect. I hit on all the things that we've already done and put in checks and balances for accountability and transparency. But I also looked at, the investment of $1 million into racial equity and implicit bias training. But just getting into the communities, we launched something called a Park Walk and Talk program. I grew up in Philly, that, where the cops used to walk a beat, as we called it. They would get in the car, they knew your mother, they knew your sister, they knew your brother. They knew everything about you, where they were like the family. They were part of the community. So I call it PWT, a Park Walk and Talk, issued out the directive to have our deputies get out of the vehicles and engage in the community. We started this August 2019. And from August 2019 to now, we've had over 6,000 times that our deputies have got out the cars, communicated with the people, and we've received nothing but positive responses from it, and resolve, crimes that were occurring in the community, because people will actually talk to you and tell you, hey, that's the bad guy. That house is the one that's the problem. People don't want problems in their community.
Right.
But they also don't want to call 911 to somebody they don't know and they don't trust. Right. So you build these relationships. We also did something with our neighborhood support team, which we designed out last year, just a model I had in my head of creating a more community-oriented model where we are engaged with every single district. We know what's going on. We're working with pastors, we're working with civic groups. And Captain Renee Peterson is my rock star there. I promoted her last year to the position. She does a great job. And by working with that neighborhood model, we partnered with Feeding South Florida and helped disperse roughly, you've probably seen on TV, about 16 million pounds of food. We did all the egress and control portions for drive-throughs and pickups. Then we hit the streets. We went to some of our more vulnerable populations, elderly populations, delivered food. So, and I'll never forget this. I may be going long, but this is important. I went to one home and I knocked on the door, and this 78-year-old lady comes up to the door and she says, "Oh, thank you. I was down to my last jar of peanut butter." This can't have that. This is America, right? We all this. Well, it was like heartbreaking. You hear this stuff, and I'm not naive, and I was homeless, and I had to fight my way out of the inner cities, and I remember those nights of no utilities and candles burning. But when I'm in this role and have such a large reach to go out into certain communities and see it and know you can touch it and change it, that's the most rewarding part of this job.
Wow. Well, I want to take you into a little more controversial matter, and I want to get your take on this. So, President Trump.
Pitches, right?
President Trump, as you know, recently signed an executive order for police reform, and I want to get your thoughts on the order. And is it enough? Is it enough from our federal government with the information that's in there? And you know a little bit more about it than I do, I'm sure.
Sure. So, second, I don't know all the specific details, but I will say one of the things, and this had come up in several other administrations beforehand, was the implementation of a national tracking database for officers who are removed or terminated for whatever reasons, to ensure that if I have to fire somebody here in Broward County, that they don't get an opportunity to go apply in Ohio and do the same thing and hurt, harm, kill, or injure somebody up there because they weren't qualified for it. I think that was probably one of the more substantive things that I've seen. But when we start looking at what we can do, I've learned this from COVID-19. We can't rely on the federal government to bail us out and take care of us. We can't rely on state government either. We have to be self-sustaining here in Broward County to do what's right for our people, to make sure that we have the resources in place to handle it. Now, as a constitutional officer in this particular setting, I have a huge latitude to do more. And you heard about those things that I've done more.
Right.
I think one of the key things now is for us to continue to push forward and get our people through this crisis and continue to build back community trust, because for every single time there's a police brutality case, there's a killing. We just seen what happened in Atlanta. It destroys the public trust. It doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. We
Absolutely.
have to out and hit the restart button and establish these things of, hey, you can trust us. We are doing the things that matter. There's a big cry and push. They said, hey, can you get on the 8 Can't Wait initiatives and put these policy elements in place to make sure? And I said, yes, absolutely. We're in compliance with every single one of them. Another element that we are able to do here in Broward County, which Mayor Honus and the commission invited me to speak on the other day, was creating a civilian review board to analyze and review every single, internal affairs investigation related to force. Has an opportunity for the community to look at it. Now, that's controversial with unions. They don't want to hear that. They don't want added checks and balances in there. But I think with the confidence that I have in my men and my women in our organization, that we are going to complete a very thorough internal affairs investigation. It will be unbiased. And when they put it on my desk, I'm going to make the right decision. So I have no reason to fear creating a civilian review board. And I look forward to seeing them establish that, because I think the public's going to say, hey, you know what? The sheriff was right. The county elected officials are doing the right thing. They're holding them accountable. Let's start trusting them a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what could civilians do more of to be involved in ensuring that, policies that you put in place are supported, but also that, yourself and others are held accountable. So, of course, the Civilian Review Board, if that's put in place, are there any other things that civilians can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Last year, we started up a multitude of things. We did a LGBTQ plus committee internal so that we can get better understanding about how to communicate in that particular segment and population here. We've had a lot of success creating new training programs and building that dialogue and recruiting from that population. New initiative that we're going to be launching is our Broward Youth Development Program. I partnered up with the Divine Nine, all our African-American fraternities and sororities. I've dedicated $250,000 to launch that program. And the core things that we're going to be working on under that program, and I have some of them here, I want to talk about this, basically a 6-tier peer approach: education, life skills, career development, financial literacy, community service, government and civic responsibilities, and then health and wellness. These are areas that I can recall just growing up as a young Black man. I didn't have access to all these things. I had to fight and hope to find them and develop them later in my life. And so you're already behind. You know, when I talk to, and it's interesting when I share conversations with my friends who are Caucasian, and you listen to what their kids are dealing with and the educational opportunities they're getting when they're like 13. I'm like, man, I didn't get that until I was 17 or 8 or 25. Like some of this stuff. So there's like a catch up. There's just a legitimate separation of equality and opportunities. And so I brought this program up to the county. They were excited. It looks like they're going to match it or maybe earmark some funds. That's a huge one. Something else that's coming up as a byproduct of what we've seen with the Floyd murder is we're creating a social justice task force where our goal is to bring in as many people possible from civic groups, legal minds, scholars, everything that we can to start looking at what can we do as our own social level of reform to keep bridging the gap between law enforcement and the minority communities, the Black and brown community out there.
Absolutely. So I know we're short on time. The last question, people are dealing with a lot right now, from impacts of COVID-19 on their mental and physical health, economic uncertainties, the harsh realities of systemic racism. What advice can you offer to our audience and to Broward County residents in these unprecedented times?
Gosh, I would say I'm optimistic. And for all that we are enduring, I'm somewhat of a historian, and I look back on things. We've been here before. 1960s, we were facing, a major medical crisis and pandemic. We were dealing with racial issues and injustices, and we've made some progress, but we are far from completing this battle and winning it. But the one thing I think we can capitalize on is the response that we've had with the Floyd murder. The response. 50 states participated in the Black Lives Matter movement. 18 countries, right? There were countries where the predominantly crowd of protesters were white.
Yeah.
Very few Black people.
Amsterdam.
That's powerful. That's powerful. We're bridging that gap where it's important we're educating each other. There's more, regardless of all the polarizing politics that we're getting out of the federal system in DC and the things the president is saying. As a country, we're still responding on a much more considerate manner. And I think if we can just, I hate to say capitalize, but if we keep this momentum going, then we're not only going to get through COVID-19, but we might make some real significant changes when it comes to equality in this country. So I'm still smiling. I still believe that we can get through this thing, but it's not going to be easy. It's never been easy. It's never been easy. And anything worth having will never come easy. There's going to take a lot of sacrifice. We're going to have some more hard days. We're going to cry some more. We're going to be more angry. We're going to face more things that are injustice, but we need to keep moving forward and not forget. Ann Marie, every time a tragedy happens, regardless of what type of police brutality or even on a national scale, 9/11, we lose momentum. For 30 days, we all unite. We're all upset. We're all passionate. We want to go in the right direction. And then after 30 days, we don't remember what happened. Move on to our own lives. We move on to our own personal agendas. and we don't focus on the global impact of what can I do for somebody else? Maybe I'm not Black. Maybe I don't understand. I didn't live that plight, but I'm sympathetic to it. So I have to fight just as hard. That's what's going to move this country. So I refuse to be cynical. I refuse. I think it's just going to take more work, and I hope that people would rally with me and help us do the things that we can to help this community. You know, we're spread across 1,300 square miles. We touch everybody. We just need to touch people the right way.
Absolutely. So all of these great initiatives that you've mentioned, Sheriff Tony, how do we find this information? Because I think that your story, the things that your agency is doing in the community is worth telling and making sure that, especially in the Black community, we're aware of these different initiatives and the ways that we can get involved as civilians. So how does one find this information?
Yeah, so to just track everything we've accomplished over the last year in programs, you can go to Sheriff Tony, go to sheriff.org, click on Sheriff Tony Initiatives. Under the initiatives, there's a PDF file that outlines all the significant changes we've made over the last 18 months. We've also just introduced short 2-minute video models where our command staff and personnel are explaining and talking about the changes that we made. You can also go on there to participate, click on our community services department if you want to get involved in any of the programs that we're doing. Sign up, get involved, participate. We'll take anybody who wants to play. Anybody who wants to do some good for this county is invited. And then stay informed. You know, you talk about this election process coming up, and not even touch that. And I'm really, that's another big thing I'm dealing with right now. But the truth trumps all, right? And if the community is educated, if they see what's going on, if they understand the changes, if they understand how it impacts them, then I'm confident they're going to support this administration. But we have to educate the community.
Absolutely. Well, give us that website again, sheriff.org.
Go to sheriff.org, click on the hyperlink or landing page for Sheriff Tony Initiatives, and it will outline every single element that we've covered in terms of new programs, initiatives, and even the changes we made in terms of policies and things for safeguarding the community.
Absolutely. And then where can our audience follow you on social media? Because we know everybody's on social media. So where can we follow you on social media?
Yeah. So first, it is me on BSO Sheriff Tony on Instagram. When I get a chance, I like to talk to the community. So it is me. I always get is this really you? It's me. I'm on there. I can't respond to everything all the time. So don't give me a hard time if I'm a couple of days behind. It's a big agency, a lot of moving parts. You can go there, and it's the same thing for Twitter as well as Facebook.
Okay, awesome. And please also visit BSO's website and social media pages as well for updates on what's happening with the agency. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Sheriff Tony. We really appreciate you. I know you're a very busy man, and please let us know how Legacy and MIA Media Group can continue to support you, and myself individually, how I can continue to support you as well. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
No, you've been awesome. It's been fun. Thank you so much, and I'll be back.
Absolutely. We'll love to have you back.
All right, let's do it.
We just have a couple of announcements. So we want to thank our sponsors again, Florida Power and Light and the Florida Lottery, for supporting Lunch with Legacy Leaders. You heard it here with our special guest, Sheriff Gregory Tony, who did an amazing job outlining what his agency is doing in our community to not only rebuild trust in the Black community, but also the efforts to reduce police brutality, as well as ending systemic racism and dealing with COVID-19. So many challenges, many issues, but it looks like BSO is doing an amazing job with that. Please look out for our political issue for Legacy Magazine, both Legacy Miami and Legacy South Florida. Our political issue comes out on June 24th in the Miami Herald, as well as the Sun Sentinel. You can also access the issue electronically. Visit miamediagroup.com. And if you are 40 years old or under, our 40 under 40 nominations will open up this week. I think I missed the mark, but I've already missed it. Did you just miss it too? We just missed it. So for those of you who are under 40 under 40 nominations will open up this week. So please look out for that information. Next week, we will be joined by Broward County Mayor Dale Honas with everything that's happening in addition to what what Sheriff Tony talked about, but he'll be talking more about what's happening overall in Broward County. So we're excited to hear from Mayor Honas next week. So please mark your calendars, share this broadcast for those who may have missed it today, but mark your calendars for every Thursday at noon. Thank you for joining us, and see you next Thursday at noon.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.